She did not resist and gave in to her boss on a stormy night. Soon, a surprising revelation transformed her life, and her future was threatened. I want to know your opinion. Does love always win? Comment and subscribe to the channel. Rain was lashing the city that night. The wind howled between the buildings, and thunder ripped through the sky like divine warnings. Mary, curled up on the kitchen sofa of the Collins, hugged her own arms, feeling the cold seep through the crevices of the huge house. The mansion, always impeccable and vibrant, looked gloomy under the storm. She had been the housekeeper there for just over a year, and despite working daily in the house, she avoided the master as much as possible. Daniel Collins was a reserved man, always enmeshed in business. Tall, with a striking gaze and a stern expression, he was respected and feared for his unpredictable temperament. He had lived alone since the end of a troubled engagement, and the only constant presence in his life was that of the staff. Mary had grown accustomed to this silent routine, always maintaining professionalism, never crossing boundaries. But that night would change everything. The thunder rumbled so loudly that it made the window panes shake. Mary got up to check if all the doors were closed when she heard a noise upstairs. A dry thud, something heavy falling to the floor. She hesitated for a moment, her heart racing. Should she go up or not? Daniel was home, but as far as she knew, he didn't like to be disturbed. Another noise. Without thinking further, Mary ran up the stairs. The office door was ajar, and when she peeked in, she saw Daniel fallen next to the desk, a glass of whiskey spilled on the floor, and papers scattered everywhere. His face was pale, his eyes wide, lost in some point on the ceiling. "Mr. Daniel!" She knelt beside him, touching his face. He was warm and his breathing was uneven. "What happened?" He took a few seconds to react. His cloudy gaze met hers, and he let out a humorless laugh. "I lost everything." Mary frowned, confused. "What?" Daniel tried to get up, but he was unsteady. Mary held him by the arm, helping him lean on the desk. Only then did she notice the almost empty whiskey bottle next to the computer. He was drunk, but that didn't explain the despair in his eyes. "My empire is crumbling," he murmured. "I was betrayed by someone inside the company. Millions were stolen, and now I'm in the sights of investors and lawyers." Mary was silent for a moment. She never imagined seeing Daniel like this. He had always been the personification of control, of absolute coldness. Now, before her, he looked like a shattered man. "I will get you a coffee," she said, trying to sound practical. "Don't call me sir." He cut her off, his voice hoarse. "I'm tired of this distance." She hesitated, feeling a shiver down her spine. "Daniel," she corrected herself, swallowing hard. He sighed and ran his hand over his face. "I'm sorry. I'm exhausted." Mary saw a weight in his words that went beyond business. For a moment, he didn't seem like the powerful businessman, but rather a lonely man, tired of carrying everything alone. "I know I'm nobody to say this," she began, choosing her words carefully. "But you don't have to face everything alone." He looked at her, surprised. There was something different in that exchange of glances. Mary felt her heart race, but she forced herself to maintain her composure. "I'm here," she said firmly. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, absorbing those words, as if they were the only thing keeping him on his feet. And then, without warning, he touched her hand. Mary felt the warmth of his skin against hers, and for a second, everything around seemed to disappear. The storm outside roared fiercely, but inside that office, only the two of them existed. It was a fleeting moment, a fraction of a second where reason abandoned them. Daniel pulled her closer, and Mary did not retreat. Their eyes met one last time before everything came crashing down, and then, amidst the storm, she gave in. The wind, howled outside, pushing the rain against the windows with fury, but nothing seemed to matter at that moment. The office, once a place for business and calculated decisions, was now a refuge where two distinct worlds collided irreversibly. Mary felt the warmth of Daniel's breath so close that her whole body seemed to react even before her mind could process what was happening. The touch of his hands felt like an electric shock, a silent breaking of all the barriers she had imposed on herself since she began working in that house. She should have pulled away. She should have remembered who she was and where she was. But she didn't. Daniel pulled her closer, his hand hesitantly sliding along her waist, as if he himself couldn't believe what he was doing. Mary held her breath when she felt the firm touch, her skin prickling under the thin fabric. "You should go." His voice came out hoarse, laden with internal conflict. Mary didn't respond. She knew he was right. She knew her presence there was a mistake, that all of this would only bring complications. But her body didn't move. Daniel's gaze seemed to hold her in place, as if he were battling something within himself, something he couldn't even control. Mary tried to find words, but her heart hammered so hard that everything felt like a blur. Daniel touched her face, his thumb sliding slowly along her warm skin. The gesture was so unexpectedly gentle that Mary felt fragile, exposed in a way she never imagined. "I shouldn't," he murmured, his dark eyes fixed on hers. Mary felt a knot in her throat. Everything about him was intense. The weight of worries, the desperation in his eyes, the way his body seemed to crave something that reason told her to deny. She didn't resist. She didn't know who moved first, but in an instant, his lips touched hers. It was a hesitant kiss at first, as if both were aware of the line they were crossing. But then the storm came, not the one roaring outside, but the one awakening within them. Daniel held her firmly, pulling her to him, and Mary reciprocated, her hands gripping his shirt as if she wanted to hold on to something solid. The taste of whiskey was still on his lips, mixed with the desperation of someone who was about to lose everything. The room spun around them, and in that moment, nothing else mattered. Mary woke up to the sound of the rain still battering the roof. For a moment, she didn't recognize where she was. The room was dark, illuminated only by the flashes of lightning that spilled into the open curtains. She felt the warmth beside her before she even turned her head. Daniel was sleeping soundly, his face partially covered by the rumpled sheets. His expression seemed different, more relaxed than usual, yet still bore traces of the tormented man. She knew. Mary's chest rose and fell unevenly. Reality hit her hard. What had they done? She sat up in bed, pulling the sheet against her body, her breath short. Everything was wrong. It wasn't supposed to happen. It couldn't have happened. Carefully, she got out of bed and began searching for her clothes on the floor. Her fingers trembled as she put on the crumpled shirt and held her shoes in her hand to make no noise. She needed to get out of there before he woke up, before guilt consumed her completely. But as she took the first step out of the room, she heard his low, hoarse voice behind her. "Are you going to run away?" Mary's heart raced. She closed her eyes for a moment before turning slowly. Daniel was sitting on the bed now, his eyes fixed on her, but his expression was unreadable. She swallowed hard. It was a mistake. Daniel didn't reply immediately. He ran a hand through his messy hair, letting out a heavy sigh. "I don't know what that was," he said finally. "But I don't think it was a mistake." Mary felt her chest tighten. Everything inside her told her that this couldn't continue, that she didn't belong in this world. But a part of her, the part that still felt his touch on her skin, wanted to believe what he said. "That doesn't change anything," she whispered. Daniel held her gaze for a few seconds before looking away. "If that's what you want, to believe..." Mary felt a lump in her throat. She needed to get out of there before it was too late. Without saying anything more, she left the room and hurried down the stairs as fast as she could, her heart hammering hard. When she finally reached her room, she closed the door behind her and leaned against it, trying to catch her breath. She couldn't let that happen again. But deep down, she knew it was too late. Time passed, but the night of that storm never left Mary's mind. She tried to bury what happened, but the following days were torturous. Daniel seemed to act as if nothing had happened. He continued his cold and calculating routine, immersed in meetings and phone calls, while she struggled to ignore the fact that her skin still remembered his touch. She tried to convince herself that it meant nothing, that it was just a moment of weakness. But every time she crossed paths with Daniel in the halls of the mansion, his eyes seemed to call her back to that night. It was a suffocating secret, something they both pretended didn't exist, until weeks later, Mary began to feel the first symptoms. At first, she thought it was just fatigue. Working at the Collins house was exhausting, and the stress of the fateful night still weighed on her. But then came the nausea. The smell of coffee, which she once loved, now caused her terrible sickness. The simple act of climbing the stairs left her body weak, and her hunger fluctuated between extremes. Sometimes she couldn't eat anything. Other times she devoured anything in front of her. It was only when the calendar marked a significant delay that the truth began to form in her mind. No, it can't be. She tried to ignore the idea, refusing to give space for that thought to grow, but something inside her already knew. The next day, after yet another morning of vomiting in her bedroom's bathroom, Mary decided she needed answers. At lunchtime, under the pretense of needing to buy some groceries for the house, she went to a secluded pharmacy where no one would recognize her. With trembling hands, she picked up a pregnancy test and took it to the cashier, avoiding the curious gaze of the attendant. Minutes later, inside a public bathroom, Mary sat on the toilet and closed her eyes while holding the test in her hands. This is crazy. The silence around her seemed deafening. She felt her heart beating too fast, her breath short. With a tightness in her chest, she gathered her courage and looked at the result. 2 lines, positive, her vision blurred. For a moment, everything around her seemed to dissolve. Her mind tried to process it, but the truth was there, laid bare in her hands. She was pregnant, and the father was Daniel Collins. The air seemed to leave her. Her whole body trembled. How was this possible? How did this happen to her? Her life had always been simple, calculated, without major twists. But now everything was about to change irreversibly. And Daniel, what would he do when he found out? Fear took hold of her. He had never shown signs of wanting anything beyond his career. He never talked about having a family or children. On the contrary, he seemed like a man too trapped in his own world, surrounded by high and impenetrable walls. Mary returned home dazed. She walked through the halls like a ghost, barely hearing when the other staff spoke to her. When she reached her room, she locked the door and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the test once more. She had to tell him, but how? She rehearsed different ways to start the conversation, but none seemed right. The fear of rejection consumed her. What if he simply said it didn't mean anything? What if he told her to leave? Mary had never felt such fear in her life. That night, Daniel came home late. She heard the car tires crunching in the garage and the front door opening. Mary was standing in the kitchen, tightly gripping the fabric of her apron, trying to gather courage. When he passed through the hallway, she took a deep breath. Daniel. He stopped, surprised. He turned slowly, his tired eyes landing on her. Mary, is something wrong? His voice, always firm and direct, made her hesitate for a second, but now she couldn't go back. She swallowed hard. I need to talk to you. It's important. Daniel frowned but nodded. Let's go to the office. She followed him, feeling weak in the knees. Each step felt like a step into the unknown, and her chest ached with the uncertainty of what would come next. When they entered the office, he closed the door and leaned against the desk, crossing his arms. What happened? Mary took a deep breath, gathering all the courage she had. She looked into his eyes and, with the firmest voice she could muster, said, "I'm pregnant." The silence that followed was devastating. Daniel stood still, as if her words were still trying to find space in his mind. His face showed no clear emotion, just shock. Mary felt her stomach churn. "What?" He finally broke the silence, his voice low, almost a whisper. She held her hands tightly to contain the trembling. "I took the test today. I'm pregnant." His eyes studied her for a long moment. Mary felt her breath hitch. She expected any reaction, anger, disbelief, a request for her to leave. But he just kept looking at her, as if trying to find an explanation for something that couldn't be explained. And then he looked away. This can't be happening. Mary's heart tightened. "Daniel." He ran a hand over his face, letting out a heavy sigh. I don't know how to deal with this." Mary's chest sank. She had hoped he would need time to process, but hearing those words hurt in a way she wasn't prepared for. "Do you think I know?" Her voice trembled. "I wasn't expecting this either, but it happened." Daniel closed his eyes for a moment before letting out a dry, incredulous laugh. I don't know what to do." Mary felt a knot tighten in her throat. "Neither do I, but running away from this isn't an option." Silence fell over them again, but this time it was different. Daniel looked like a man fighting something inside himself. He was not the type to express emotions easily, but there in that moment she saw the conflict in his eyes. Without saying anything else, he turned and left the office, leaving Mary alone with her fear and uncertainty. She knew nothing would be easy from then on, but what she still didn't know was that this pregnancy was about to change everything. The night was long. Mary couldn't sleep. Her heart pounded like a drum, rhythmically driven by fear, and her mind spun in circles, replaying every detail of the conversation with Daniel Collins. He simply left. He didn't shout, didn't show anger, didn't send her away. But his silence was even worse. She stayed awake for hours, sitting on the edge of the bed, holding her own hands to keep them from shaking. What would happen now? Daniel was a businessman, calculative, accustomed to controlling all the variables in his life. But this was beyond his control. The sun had not yet risen when Mary heard the mansion's door open and close. She got up quickly, going to her bedroom window. Outside, Daniel got into the car and sped away without looking back. He was gone. Mary felt her stomach churn. Where was he going? Running away from responsibility, needing space. What if he never came back? Her whole body trembled. She couldn't panic. The days dragged on in a suffocating silence. Daniel didn't return home that night, nor the next day. The staff began to notice his absence. Some asked if he was traveling for work. Mary just shook her head and said she didn't know. The truth was she didn't know either. She called him once. The call rang, until it went to voicemail. After that, she didn't try again. Each morning was a torment of nausea and dizziness. Her routine remained the same, taking care of the house, supervising the staff, keeping everything spotless. But something inside her had changed. She was no longer just the housekeeper of the Collins. She carried a life inside her, and she was completely alone. On the 5th day after the fateful conversation, Daniel returned. It was nearly midnight when Mary heard the sound of the front door opening. Her whole body tensed. She slowly descended the stairs, her steps light as a ghost. Daniel was in the living room, throwing the keys onto the table. His face was tired, his beard unshaved. But his eyes, there was something different about them. He saw her standing there in the middle of the stairs and sighed. "We need to talk." Mary nodded and descended the remaining steps, feeling her throat dry. Daniel pointed to the couch, and she sat down with her heart racing. The silence between them was thick. "I needed some time to think," he started, rubbing his hands over his face before looking at her. This caught me completely off guard." Mary tightened her fingers over her knees. "I know, it was a shock for me too." Daniel took a deep breath. "I'm not a family man, Mary. I never thought about being a father. I never imagined this would happen." She felt a tightening in her chest. "Are you telling me you don't want this child?" His eyes locked onto hers. For a second, Daniel didn't respond. "I'm not saying that," he murmured. "I'm saying I don't know how to deal with this." Mary felt tears threatening but blinked quickly. "I don't know either, but we have no choice." Daniel leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, hands intertwined. He looked like a man on the edge of a cliff, not knowing whether to jump or step back. "I'm not good at this, Mary." His voice came out low. "I don't know how to be someone you can trust." Mary felt anger rising inside her. "I don't need you to be perfect. I just need to know if you will be here." He fell silent. For a moment, all that could be heard was their broken breathing. And then Daniel looked at her with something different in his gaze. "I won't run away," he said finally. Mary felt the air return to her lungs. He didn't say he was happy. He didn't say he wanted to build a family with her, but he wouldn't abandon her. And for now, that was enough. Time passed. Months trudged slowly, and Mary's belly began to grow. The house staff noticed the change, and soon the rumors started. No one knew who the father was, and no one dared to ask. Daniel remained present, but always at a distance. He made sure she had everything she needed: medical exams, a balanced diet, comfort, but they never talked about what would come next. Mary felt there was a barrier between them, something invisible but insurmountable. Until one day, everything changed. It was a morning like any other. Mary was in the kitchen, preparing tea when she heard the front door open. She turned, and her heart stopped for a moment. Beatrice was there, tall, slender, impeccable as always. The heels echoed on the marble floor of the entrance, and her gaze carried a cutting superiority. Mary's heart raced. She knew Beatrice. Everyone in the house did. Daniel's ex-fiancée, the woman he loved in the past, the one who almost became his wife. What was she doing there? Beatrice smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. Mary, right? She forced herself to take a deep breath. Yes. Beatrice looked around as if inspecting the house. "I heard Daniel has been very concerned about you." Mary felt the blood run cold. Beatrice fixed her gaze on Mary's belly and raised an eyebrow. "So the rumors are true. You're expecting a child from him." Mary swallowed hard. "What do you want?" Beatrice took a step forward, leaning slightly as if wanting Mary to hear each word clearly. "I want to help you understand something." Her voice was low, cold. "Daniel may be here now, but he's not the kind of guy who stays." Mary felt a shiver run down her spine. "He has changed," she murmured. Beatrice let out a short laugh. "Do you really believe that?" Mary didn't respond. Beatrice smiled, again, as if she had just won an invisible game. "I just want you to be prepared, Mary, because when he gets tired of playing family, you'll realize you're completely alone." Mary felt tears burning in her eyes, but she didn't show weakness. Beatrice adjusted her hair and turned halfway, walking toward the door. Before leaving, she turned one last time. "Good luck, dear. You'll need it." And then she was gone. Mary stood there motionless with a broken heart. She wanted to believe Beatrice was wrong, but deep down, fear whispered another thing. What if she was right? Mary remained there, motionless, staring at the door through which Beatrice had just exited. Her words still echoed in her mind, like poison seeping into her veins. When he gets tired of playing family, you will realize that you are completely alone. Fear overtook her in a way she had never felt before. Everything she had been trying to ignore for the past few months was now laid bare before her. What if Daniel really left? What if he was there only out of obligation? Her heart pounded in her chest. She tried to push those thoughts away, but they were there, persistent, eroding her certainties. She took a deep breath and forced herself to continue her routine. But inside, something had changed. That night, Daniel arrived earlier. Mary heard when he entered the house, the sound of his firm footsteps echoing down the hallway. She was in the kitchen, washing some dishes, trying to distract her mind. But then, his voice reached her. "Can we talk?" Mary closed her eyes for a moment before turning around. He was there, standing at the kitchen entrance, the sleeves of his shirt rolled up to his elbows, the tie loose around his neck. He looked tired, but there was something more in his gaze. "Sure," she said, drying her hands quickly. Daniel hesitated for a moment before stepping inside completely. He wasn't the type to show vulnerability, but Mary sensed that he was, trying to choose the right words. "I know I haven't been present the way I should have," he began. Mary crossed her arms, waiting for him to continue. "I've never been through anything like this before," he admitted, looking away. "And to be honest, I'm still trying to understand what this means for me." Mary felt a tightness in her chest. "What does this mean for you, Daniel?" He looked at her, and something in his expression made her hold her breath. "I don't know," he confessed, his voice low, sincere. "But I know I don't want to run away from this." Mary wanted to believe him. She really did. But Beatrice's visit still burned in her mind. "And what if you change your mind?" Her voice came out more fragile than she would have liked. Daniel furrowed his brow. "What are you talking about?" She hesitated for a moment before deciding to be honest. Beatrice was here today. His expression changed instantly. "What?" "She came to tell me that in the end you will abandon me." Daniel fell silent for a few seconds, the muscles in his jaw tightening. "She shouldn't have come here." Mary let out a humorless laugh. "Is that all you have to say?" He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "Do you really believe her?" Mary looked away. I don't know, Daniel. I see you trying, but at the same time it seems like you're here just because you feel you have to be." Daniel was silent for a long moment. Then he stepped forward. "I'm not an easy man, Mary. I've never known how to deal with feelings. But since that night," he hesitated, "since I found out about the baby, something has changed. Inside me." Mary felt her heart clench. "Changed how?" He held her gaze. "I'm still trying to understand, but I know I don't want to see you leave." Mary felt tears welling up in her eyes. "And what if one day you do want to?" Daniel let out a heavy sigh. "Then I will fight to make sure that never happens." The silence between them was heavy, intense. Mary wanted to believe him. She needed to believe. And for now, that was enough. The following months brought changes. Daniel became more present. At first, it was just ensuring that she had all the necessary support, the best doctors, balanced, meals, proper rest. But over time, his presence began to extend beyond obligations. He started having dinner at home more often, sitting next to her while she read in the living room. Even the moments of silence between them began to carry a different weight. There was something growing there. Something they both felt, but neither dared to name. But fate had more surprises in store. It was an ordinary afternoon when Mary went to the hospital for a routine exam. Daniel insisted on accompanying her, and despite his always serious expression, she knew he was anxious. She lay on the stretcher while the doctor spread cold gel over her belly. The ultrasound began, and the screen lit up with blurry black and white images. Mary held Daniel's hand without even realizing it. "Is the baby healthy?" she asked, her heart racing. The doctor smiled. "Yes, but are you ready for a surprise?" Mary felt the air trapped in her lungs. "Surprise?" The doctor pointed to the screen. "You're not just expecting one baby, there are two." The silence in the room was absolute. Mary blinked, thinking she had misunderstood. "Two?" The doctor confirmed with a smile. "Yes, you're expecting twins." Mary's heart felt like it was about to burst from her chest. She turned to Daniel, and for the first time she saw raw emotion on his face. He was shocked. "Twins," he repeated, as if he was trying to process the information. Mary laughed, still in disbelief. "My God." She looked at the screen again, and there they were, two little miracles. Daniel was silent for a long time. Mary didn't know what he was thinking, and that made her anxious. But then he squeezed her hand. When she looked at him, she saw something new in his gaze, determination. "Come what may," he said, his voice firm, "we will face this together." And in that moment, Mary wanted to believe that this time he was serious. Mary left the office feeling weak in the legs, still trying to process everything. Twins. She was expecting 2 children. Her head was spinning, and her heart was pounding in her chest. By her side, Daniel was equally silent. The news seemed to have hit both of them like an electric shock, something they were not prepared to receive. They both got into the car without saying a word. The engine started, but Daniel didn't turn the ignition. He sat there, hands firmly on the steering wheel, his gaze lost ahead. Mary observed him from the corner of her eye. "Are you okay?" He let out a sigh and ran his hands over his face. "I don't know," he replied honestly. She swallowed hard. "Me neither." Finally, Daniel turned to her. His dark eyes were intense, laden with something she couldn't decipher. "I never imagined being a father," he said, his voice hoarse. "Now, all of a sudden, it's 2. Mary let out a short, humorless laugh. "I never imagined that either." Daniel was silent for a moment. Then he did something that surprised her. He took her hand. "But I will figure this out," he said, firmly. "I will be here." Mary wanted to believe him, but a voice inside her still carried Beatrice's words like a constant warning. "Daniel might be here now, but he's not the type to stick around." She forced a smile and squeezed his hand lightly. "I hope so." But deep down, the fear wouldn't go away. The days that followed were an emotional roller coaster. Daniel seemed more involved than ever. He began to accompany her to every appointment, insisted on organizing a room for the babies, and even cancelled some business trips to be around more. But despite this, Mary couldn't ignore the shadow of doubt that always lingered over them. She wondered if he was there out of obligation or of his own free will. And then everything changed. One night, Mary woke up feeling a strong dizziness. She tried to sit up in bed, but her vision darkened for a few seconds. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Maybe it was just a drop in blood pressure, but when she tried to get up, she felt an overwhelming weight on her chest. "What is happening?" she whispered to herself. Her hands were trembling. Cold sweat was running down her forehead. A growing panic took over her. Something was wrong. With difficulty, she managed to get up and walk to the door. She opened it with effort and took a few steps down the hallway. "Daniel." Her voice came out weak. But then, before she could take another step, everything went dark. When she opened her eyes, the hospital light was the first thing she saw. The smell of disinfectant and the distant sound of monitors were unmistakable. Mary blinked a few times, trying to understand where she was. Her body felt heavy, as if she had run a marathon. "You're awake." Daniel's voice made her heart race. She turned her head slowly and saw him there, sitting beside the bed. His face was weary, unshaven, his eyes deep-set as if he hadn't slept for days. "What happened?" Mary asked, her voice weak. Daniel ran his hand over his face, letting out a heavy sigh. "You fainted at home. I found you collapsed in the hallway and brought you to the hospital." Mary furrowed her brow, trying to remember. Everything seemed like a blur. "And the babies?" she asked, feeling the panic rise. Daniel held her hand. "They're okay, but—" He hesitated. Mary felt a chill run down her spine. But what? It was then that the doctor entered the room. "I'm glad you woke up, Mary." The woman smiled reassuringly. "What happened to me?" Mary asked, her voice filled with concern. The doctor took the clipboard and sighed. "You have a condition called mirror syndrome." Mary blinked, confused. "Mirror syndrome," the doctor nodded. "It's a rare condition in twin pregnancies. Basically, your body is reacting as if it were developing the same symptoms as one of the babies, which can cause serious complications." The air left Mary's lungs. "Complications?" Daniel tensed by her side. The doctor continued. "Your body is accumulating fluids and your blood pressure is unstable. This can affect your health and that of the babies. We need to monitor you closely from now on." Mary felt fear growing within her. "But they're okay." "For now, yes," the doctor assured. "But we will need complete rest." Daniel squeezed Mary's hand tighter. "Does that mean she needs to be hospitalized?" The doctor hesitated. "Not necessarily, but she can't exert herself, and if the situation worsens, an emergency delivery may be necessary." Mary felt the world spin around her. This was it. Her fear was becoming reality. Daniel was by her side now, but for how long? How long would he stay before the pressure and fear pushed him away? The doctor made a few more recommendations before leaving them alone in the room. Mary sat in silence for a long time, feeling tears burn in her eyes. Then she felt Daniel squeeze her hand again. "We will face this together," he said, his voice firm. Mary turned to him, feeling her heart tighten. "And if we don't make it?" Daniel held her face gently, looking into her eyes. "We will make it." Mary wanted to believe that, but something inside her was saying that things were about to get even harder. Mary returned home that night, but nothing seemed the same. The medical recommendation was clear. Complete rest. No effort, no stress. But how to avoid stress when, at any moment, her life and the baby's could be at risk? Daniel stayed by her side throughout the hospital discharge. The way he held her arm, as if afraid she would break, showed real concern. But Mary couldn't shake the thought that this might only be temporary. As soon as they arrived at the mansion, Daniel was categorical. "From now on, you don't lift a finger." Mary raised an eyebrow. "I can still walk, Daniel. I am not disabled." He looked at her with relentless seriousness. "I'm not joking. I've spoken with the staff. We will have a nurse coming every day to assist you." She widened her eyes. "A nurse?" "Yes, and a nutritionist. Your diet needs to be monitored." Mary crossed her arms. "Daniel, I am not your corporate project. I am a person." He took a deep breath, as if struggling against his own impatience. "Don't you understand? I can't take risks with you." She opened her mouth to argue, but then saw something in his eyes. Fear. The great Daniel Collins was scared. Mary closed her eyes and let out a tired sigh. "I understand," she finally said. Daniel nodded and ran his hands over his face, clearly exhausted. "You need to rest. I will go upstairs with you." Mary didn't argue. She let him guide her to the bedroom, feeling a deep exhaustion take over her body. When she lay down on the bed, she felt the weight of the entire day fall upon her. For a moment, she thought Daniel would simply leave the room. But to her surprise, he sat in the armchair next to the bed. "What are you doing?" she asked. He took his phone out of his pocket without looking at her. "I'm staying here," she frowned. "Here, in my room." He finally met her gaze. "If something happens, I want to be close." Mary felt her chest tighten. Daniel could be difficult, closed off, but in that moment, she saw the truth. He was trying, and as much as the fear still whispered inside her, she allowed her heart to find a bit of peace that night. Days passed, and Daniel kept his promise. He was there. The nurse arrived every morning, checked her vital signs, ensured she was eating well. Mary hated the idea of being treated like a fragile object, but gradually she realized that her body really wasn't the same as before. The fatigue was overwhelming. The pressure fluctuated. The nausea still came and went from time to time. But Daniel's presence was constant. He started working from home more frequently. His meetings were held via video. His phone calls now took place in the mansion's office. He was always nearby, attentive to any signs that something might be wrong. And slowly, something changed between them. One night, Mary woke up startled. From a nightmare, she felt her breath quicken, her heart hammering against her chest. She tried to calm down, but the fear was still there, pulsing. Then she felt a presence beside her. "What is it?" Daniel's voice sounded low and sleepy. She turned in bed and saw that he was still there in the armchair, his eyes half closed with sleep. "Nothing," she whispered. "Just a bad dream." He ran a hand over his face and got up. "Do you want me to get you some water?" She hesitated before shaking her head. "No, just stay here." Daniel looked at her for a moment before nodding and sitting back down. And for the first time, Mary felt like she was not completely alone. But the tranquility was short-lived. The next afternoon, while Mary was trying to rest in her room, she heard a conversation downstairs. A voice she knew very well, Beatrice. Mary's body froze. What was she doing here again? With effort, she sat up in bed and tried to listen better. "Daniel, are you really going to continue with this farce?" Beatrice's voice was laden with venom. "This is not a farce." "Oh, please," Beatrice laughed sarcastically. "You are forcing yourself to be with this woman because you feel guilty. But everyone knows this won't last." Mary felt her chest tighten. "Enough, Beatrice," Daniel said, and his voice was firm. "I already told you to stay out of this." "Stay out," Beatrice scoffed. "Daniel, I know you. I know that you don't want this life. Are you trying to be a family man now? Spare me. You are not that kind of man." Mary felt her body tremble. The silence that followed was torturous. And then Daniel spoke. "Maybe you never really knew me." Beatrice let out a dry laugh. "You're in love with her, aren't you?" Mary held her breath, but Daniel didn't answer immediately. Mary waited, waiting for something. A yes, a no, anything. But all that came was silence, and that silence was like a punch to her chest. She felt the tears burning in her eyes, because in that moment she realized that despite everything Daniel was doing, he still didn't know what he felt for her. And that was enough for Beatrice to still hold power over her fears. Beatrice laughed again, but this time her voice had a victorious tone. "That's what I thought." And then the sound of the door closing was heard. Mary turned in bed and squeezed her eyes shut, letting the tears flow silently. Daniel was there, but for how long? Mary lay still in bed, her eyes fixed on the ceiling, feeling each beat of her heart as if it were hammer blows inside her chest. She waited for Daniel to come upstairs, waited for him to come into her room and say something, anything. But he didn't come. She heard his footsteps in the hallway, heard the office door close, and after that, only silence. And it was in that silence that her fear grew. He hadn't denied it. He hadn't said he was in love with her. And worse, he hadn't come up to see her after the conversation with Beatrice. Mary felt tears silently stream down her face. She hated feeling this way. She hated feeling vulnerable. But more than that, she hated feeling that Beatrice might be right. Daniel might be here now, but he is not the kind that stays. Those words echoed like a cruel reminder inside her. The next day was torment. Mary avoided leaving the room, pretending she still needed to rest. But the truth was, she didn't want to see Daniel. She didn't want to look into his eyes and see doubt, uncertainty. She needed answers, but she was afraid of what she would hear. It was only in the late afternoon that Daniel finally appeared. He knocked lightly on the door before opening it and stepping in. "Are you okay?" he asked, closing the door behind him. Mary was sitting on the bed, hugging her legs. "I'm tired," she said, avoiding his gaze. He sighed and approached, pulling a chair closer to the bed. "I know you heard." She closed her eyes for a second. "I heard." Daniel ran his hand through his hair, visibly uncomfortable. "Beatrice." "It doesn't matter what she said." Mary cut in, finally looking at him. "What matters is what you didn't say." He fell silent. "You hesitated, Daniel. You didn't deny it." He closed his eyes for a moment before facing her. "Because I don't know." Mary felt her chest sink. What do you mean you don't know?" He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. "I've never felt this before, Mary. I've never been the kind of man who gets involved. I've never allowed myself to feel anything for anyone." She felt a lump form in her throat. And now? Daniel was silent for a long time before releasing a heavy sigh. "Now I know that I don't want to lose you." Mary blinked, surprised. "What does that mean?" He took her hand in his. "It means that even without knowing how to handle all of this, I know I want to be here." She wanted to believe. God, how? She wanted to believe, but was it enough? Days passed and Daniel stayed by her side, but something inside Mary was still restless. She saw that he was trying hard, saw that he was trying to be someone better for her and for the babies. But what if all of this was just a duty for him? What if one day he woke up and realized that this wasn't what he wanted? Those doubts haunted her every night, until one day fate put everything to the test. It was early morning when Mary woke up feeling a sharp pain in her abdomen. She tried to sit up, but a strong cramp made her groan. Sweat dripped down her forehead, and her breathing was irregular. Something was wrong, very wrong. She tried to call Daniel, but her voice came out weak. "Daniel?" He was sleeping in the chair beside the bed, but woke up instantly upon hearing her pained tone. "What's wrong?" he asked, quickly getting up. Mary clutched his hand tightly. "Something is wrong." His eyes widened. "I'll call a doctor." He grabbed his phone and dialed the hospital, talking quickly with the medical team. Minutes later, he was helping Mary out of bed and into the car. Every second felt like an eternity. When they arrived at the hospital, Mary was taken directly to the obstetric emergency room. Daniel tried to accompany her, but he was stopped at the door. "Sir, we need you to wait here," a nurse said. "But we'll take care of her and the babies. But we need space." Daniel felt desperation grow inside him as he watched Mary being taken away. He had never felt so powerless in his entire life. He paced back and forth, running his hands through his hair, feeling on the verge of collapse. And it was in that moment that he realized the truth. The thought of losing Mary, the thought that something might happen to her or the babies. It was unbearable. He needed her, not because it was an obligation, not because it was the right thing to do, but because he loved her. The realization hit him like a punch in the stomach, and for the first time, Daniel Collins was absolutely certain of what he felt, but would he still have time to tell her? The clock marked endless minutes. Daniel walked back and forth in the cold hospital corridor, each second a torture, he thought a blow to his sanity. He had never felt so much fear in his life, never, and now, standing there unable to do anything but wait, he finally understood. It wasn't just about the babies. It was about her. Mary was no longer just the housekeeper who worked in the Collins home. She was no longer just the woman who, by some twist of fate, carried his children. She was the woman who, without realizing, it had become his foundation, and the possibility of losing her was simply unacceptable. A door opened, and Daniel turned around at that moment. "Mr. Collins!" The doctor appeared, holding a clipboard, her expression serious. Daniel's heart almost leaped out of his chest. "How is she? And the babies?" The doctor sighed before answering. "Mary's blood pressure rose dangerously. We had to stabilize her and administer medication." Daniel felt the air leave his lungs. "And now?" "She is out of immediate danger, but her condition remains delicate. We will monitor her closely." He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to absorb the words. "And the babies?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "They are fine for now, but if her pressure remains unstable, we may have to deliver them earlier than expected." Daniel nodded, trying to contain the turmoil within him. "Can I see her?" The doctor hesitated before responding. "Yes, but try not to agitate her. She needs to rest." Daniel didn't wait any longer. Seconds later, he entered the room. Mary was lying in bed, her eyes closed, her pale face against the white pillow. The monitor beside the bed showed her heart rate, and an IV was connected to her arm. Daniel felt a knot tighten in his throat. She looked so fragile, so small there. He approached slowly, pulling up a chair to sit beside her. He took her hand, feeling the cold skin against his. "You scared me." His voice came out low, but heavy with emotion. Mary opened her eyes slowly. "I'm still here," she murmured, her voice weak. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, squeezing her hand. "You can't do this to me," he said, his voice filled with something new, something he had never said before. I need you." Mary's eyes met his. "Daniel." He took a deep breath and squeezed her hand even tighter. "I love you." The silence that followed was different from all the others they had ever shared. Mary blinked as if she wasn't sure she had heard correctly. "What?" He leaned closer, his eyes fixed on hers. "I love you, Mary." She opened her mouth, but no words came out. A tear rolled down her face. "You're saying that because you're afraid of losing me." "No." Daniel shook his head. "I'm saying this because I finally understood. I have been an idiot all this time, but the truth is you are the only thing that really matters to me." Mary felt more tears escape. "Daniel." He leaned in and kissed her hand. "I'm not going anywhere. Never." She closed her eyes, allowing herself to believe for the first time that maybe, just maybe, he was speaking the truth. The days that followed were a test of patience. Mary remained in the hospital under observation, and Daniel never left her side. He slept in an uncomfortable chair, ignored messages and calls from work, and only got up to fetch something for her. And it was during this time that Mary realized that something had truly changed. He wasn't there out of obligation. He was there because he wanted to, and that made all the difference. But fate wasn't finished with them yet. In the early hours of a Friday, Mary woke up feeling a strange pressure in her abdomen. She breathed deeply, trying to ignore it, but then felt a sharp pain. Her entire body tensed. "Daniel." Her voice came out trembling. He woke up instantly. "What is it?" She squeezed his hand tightly. "I think that it's happening." Daniel's eyes widened. He pressed the emergency button next to the bed. In seconds, doctors and nurses entered the room. "The contractions have started," Mary murmured, feeling her breath become irregular. The doctor quickly checked her vital signs and then looked at Daniel. "The babies are coming. We need to take her to the delivery room now." Daniel's heart raced. Mary held his hand tightly, her eyes filled with fear. "I'm with you," Daniel said firmly. "Until the end." She nodded, trying to control the panic. As she was taken to the delivery room, Daniel stayed by her side, not letting go of her hand. He had never been so sure of anything in his life. They would get through this together, and nothing in the world would change that. The hospital was in frantic motion. Mary felt her body being pushed on a stretcher through the brightly lit corridors, doctors and nurses exchanging quick, technical words. Her mind was clouded by the pain of contractions and the fear that grew in her chest. Daniel ran alongside her, holding her hand tightly. He had never felt anything like this before, a sense of absolute despair, a suffocating fear that something could go wrong. "I am here," he repeated, trying to keep his voice steady so she would know she wasn't alone. Mary squeezed his hand so tightly her nails dug into his skin, but Daniel didn't even register the pain. The doctor stopped the stretcher in front of the delivery room and looked at him. "We are taking her now." Daniel stepped forward. "I will go in with her." The doctor hesitated. "Are you sure?" Daniel's eyes burned, but his voice came out firm. Yes, he had never been so sure of anything in his life. Minutes later, Daniel was by Mary's side in the operating room, dressed in sterile clothes. The sound of monitors echoed throughout the room as the doctors organized themselves around the delivery table. Mary was breathing heavily. Sweat dripped down her forehead, and her expression was a mix of pain and exhaustion. "You're doing well," Daniel whispered, holding her hand. "You are strong, Mary." She squeezed her eyes shut, feeling another contraction. I don't know. If I can." Daniel leaned in closer, his forehead touching hers. "Yes, you can. I am here." Mary opened her eyes and saw something in his gaze. This time, there was no uncertainty. There was love. And that was enough for her to keep fighting. The doctor checked the monitors and looked at Mary. "It's time." Daniel's heart raced. Mary took a deep breath, and when the doctor gave the command, she forced her body with all the strength she had left. The seconds dragged on like hours, and then the cry of a baby echoed through the room. Mary gasped, tears streaming down her tired face. Daniel felt a tightness in his chest, an overwhelming emotion taking over him. "The first baby has arrived," the doctor announced. Mary sobbed with relief, and Daniel kissed her forehead. But there was no time for rest. "The second one is coming," the doctor warned. Mary shut her eyes tightly. Daniel held her hand tighter. "Come on, love. You can do it." She took a deep breath and gathered her last bit of strength, and then, a few minutes later, a second cry filled the room. "The second baby is born!" Mary's tears were uncontrollable. Daniel felt his chest explode with emotion as he saw the two little ones being taken for evaluation. He turned to Mary, his eyes misty. "You did it." She smiled at him, her expression tired but full of love. "We did it." Daniel leaned in and kissed her forehead tenderly. At that moment, there was no doubt left. He was exactly where he was, meant to be, by the side of the woman he loved, with the children who would change his life forever, and nothing else mattered. Hours later, Mary was in a quiet room, holding the babies in her arms. They were small, fragile, but perfect. Daniel was by her side, looking at the children with an expression that Mary had never seen before. "They are beautiful," he murmured. Mary smiled, caressing one of the tiny faces. "Yes, they are." He took a deep breath and looked at her. "I never imagined I would be here, that I would feel this." She watched him, waiting for him to continue. Daniel swallowed hard, holding one of the tiny hands of the baby. "But now I can't imagine my life any other way." Mary felt her eyes burn again. Daniel turned to her, took her hand, and kissed it. "I love you, Mary. I love our family." She smiled, feeling her chest fill with an indescribable warmth. "I also love you, Daniel." He took a deep breath and then did something that left her completely speechless. He took a small box from his lab coat pocket and opened it. Inside there was a ring. Mary held her breath. "Daniel." He looked into her eyes, his voice filled with emotion. "Marry me." She felt a sob escape her throat. "Are you sure?" Daniel smiled. "I have never been so sure of anything in my life." Mary's eyes filled with tears. She looked at the babies in her arms, then at the man in front of her, that man who, against all odds, chose to stay. She smiled, letting the tears fall freely. "Yes." Daniel smiled and slid the ring onto her finger. Then he leaned in and kissed her, a kiss full of promises. Their future was just beginning, and this time it would be together. The following days were pure transformation. Mary was still recovering from childbirth, but nothing compared to the feeling of holding her children in her arms. Every cry, every yawn, every little movement of those babies made her feel an emotion she had never experienced before. Daniel, on the other hand, was a different man. If he used to hesitate to show feelings, now he never left the family he had built for. A single moment, he held the babies with tenderness, afraid to hurt them. He learned to change diapers, to soothe their cries, and even to walk around the house with one of the little ones in his arms while working on the phone. Mary watched him, fascinated. He had become a man that even he didn't know he could be. When they finally returned home, the Collins mansion seemed like a completely different place. Before, it was cold, silent, filled with rules and disciplined staff. Now it was the home of a family. The babies cried during the night, interrupting any trace of a peaceful routine that Daniel might have had. But contrary to what anyone expected, he never complained. One night Mary woke up and realized that the bed beside her was empty. Curious, she carefully got up and walked to the baby's room. When she opened the door, she found Daniel there, sitting in an armchair with one of the sons asleep on his chest, while the other slept in the crib beside him. She leaned against the doorframe, watching the scene with a tender smile. "You're going to end up sleeping there." Daniel slowly opened his eyes, a small smile on his lips. "It's worth it." Mary approached and caressed the little face of the baby he was holding. "They are our life now, aren't they?" Daniel nodded, his eyes full of a love he never imagined he could feel. "They are. And you too." She smiled, feeling her heart warm. Their life was not perfect. There were still challenges, sleepless nights, fears, and insecurities. But for the first time, Mary knew that Daniel was there to stay, not because he felt obliged, but because it was exactly where he wanted to be. Months later, the wedding came. It was an intimate ceremony, just for family and close friends. Mary didn't want anything extravagant. She just wanted to look at Daniel and know that after everything they had been through, they had finally arrived where they should be. She walked down the aisle, linked arm in arm with her brother, feeling her heart race when she saw Daniel waiting for her. He was impeccable in his suit, but what made her smile was the gaze he cast at her. It was the same look he had when holding their children, the look of someone who had finally found his home. When they stood face to face, Daniel took her hands and whispered, "You changed my life, Mary." She smiled, feeling tears sting her eyes. "And you changed mine." That day, in front of the people they loved, they promised each other what they had already promised in silence long before, that they would face everything together, forever. The years passed, and life went on. The children grew up, surrounded by love. Daniel balanced his professional life with his family, proving to everyone and to himself that he could be a present father and a dedicated husband. Mary became not only his wife, but his partner in everything. She helped him see the world differently, lighter, more human. They still had challenges, like any couple. But the love they built was enough to face each one of them, because, at the end of the day, Daniel was no longer the man who avoided feelings. He was the man who chose to feel, and Mary, who once feared being alone, now knew she would never be again. They had found in each other something neither of them was looking for, but that in the end was all that really mattered, the end. And this was the touching story of Mary and Daniel, a testament that love can arise in the most unexpected moments and transform lives forever. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment telling us what moved you the most. We really want to know your opinion. And don't forget to share this story with someone special and subscribe to the channel to follow more stories full of emotion and twists. Until next time.